When the Black Death swept through Europe in the 1340s, killing half the population, the Pope was in his palace, surrounded by money and comfort. He lived like a prince while cities were burning bodies in mass graves. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was 800 years earlier, when the first recorded pandemic in history, the Justinian plague, killed 25 million people. And a pope had to rule through it. Then, 50 years later, another pope died from it. Then another pope had to rebuild Rome while it was collapsing. And 800 years after that, the Black Death came, and a pope made it worse by calling for mass pilgrimage. This is the story of 5 popes who ruled during humanity's deadliest pandemics. Popes who watched cities die. Popes who died themselves. Popes who tried to lead a church while the world was ending. It's a story about institutional failure, about how the church couldn't stop death, about how sometimes the most powerful position in the world means nothing when a disease doesn't care about your authority. Drop a comment right now. If you were Pope during a plague that killed half the population, what would you do? And tell me your location and what time it is, because I want to know who's watching this thinking about how little power even the Pope really has. Also, which Pope's plague story shocks you the most? Comment below, because some of these decisions cost millions of lives. Part 1. The first Pope to rule during the first pandemic. The year is 541. A plague begins in Egypt and spreads across the Mediterranean. It's the Justinian plague, the first documented pandemic in human history. It afflicts the entire Mediterranean basin, Europe, and the Near East between 541-549, killing about a fifth of the population in Constantinople. And the Pope during this catastrophe is Vigilius. Vigilius becomes Pope in 537, just 4 years before the plague hits. He's ruling the Church during the Byzantine Empire's attempt to reconquer the Western Roman Empire. He's dealing with theological disputes. He's navigating Byzantine politics. Then the plague arrives, and everything changes. By 543, the plague had spread to every corner of Justinian's empire. Millions are dying. The economy is collapsing. Cities are emptying. And Vigilius has to lead a church that's watching its flock die by the thousands. But Vigilius doesn't just struggle with the plague. He gets caught up in the politics around it. In 545, an imperial official arrives in Rome on November 25th, 545, and takes Pope Vigilius in custody with orders to transport him to Constantinople. The Emperor Justinian wants to force Vigilius to accept a theological position Vigilius refuses to endorse. So while the plague is still raging across the Mediterranean, while people are dying everywhere, Vigilius is being kidnapped by the emperor and taken across the sea to Constantinople. He's forced to travel during a pandemic. He's held as a prisoner. He's isolated from Rome while leading the church. And finally, Vigilius dies in Sicily on June 7th, 555, while returning to Rome. Vigilius rules during the deadliest plague in history up to his time. He watches millions die. He gets kidnapped and exiled. He dies away from Rome, never returning home. His papacy is defined not by theological achievement or spiritual leadership, but by plague and exile. Part 2. The Pope who died from it. 50 years after Vigilius, in 590, another plague wave hits Rome. This time, the Pope is Pelagius II. In the winter before the plague broke out, many of Rome's granaries were damaged when the Tiber flooded in November 589. The epidemic began in early 590, and the disease killed people rapidly. Pelagius II is trying to hold Rome together. The Lombards are attacking, the infrastructure is crumbling, the city is starving. And then the plague arrives. Bishop of Rome Pelagius II died of plague in February 590. That's it. The Pope dies. Just like anyone else. No spiritual authority protects him. No prayer saves him. No position of power prevents him from becoming infected. Pelagius II becomes one of the first recorded popes to die of plague. His death marks a moment when the Church realizes the Pope is mortal. The Pope is vulnerable. The Pope can die like everyone else. But his death isn't the end of the story. His death is just the beginning of someone else's burden. Part 3. The reluctant Pope who rebuilt Rome. When Pelagius II dies, the church needs a new leader, and they pick a man who doesn't want the job. His name is Gregory. He's a deacon, a former prefect of Rome, a monk, an aristocrat. He's educated, he's experienced, he's also absolutely terrified of becoming pope. During the months before his election, Gregory sought to help the people of Rome find their way back to God through prayer. Gregory devoted all of his family's assets to feeding and caring for the sick and poor. He led a procession of clergy and monastics and lay faithful through the city's streets, chanting Kyrie eleison as they called the people to repent and prayed for God to alleviate the plague. He's doing everything right. He's helping, he's praying, he's organising relief efforts. And then the church says, "You're pope now." Gregory tries to refuse. He sends letters to the emperor saying, "No, pick someone else." But the emperor confirms his election. The church insists. He's forced to accept. And what Gregory inherits is apocalyptic. The world is literally ending around him. The Roman Empire in the west had fallen, the infrastructure of Rome lay in ruins, the Tiber was constantly flooding, and famine and the bubonic plague were decimating a population already in steep decline. Gregory becomes pope in the middle of a plague, during a collapsing civilization, while leading a church that has lost all ability to stop death. But he doesn't give up. He gets creative. When the plague was in Rome in 590, and Gregory was still a deacon, he organised processions to take place in Rome, wherein 7 groups would hold processions through the streets of the city and ending at the Basilica of Mary Major to ask for the Virgin Mary's protection. The processions took place on April 25th, 590. The 7 processional groups were 1 clergy, 2 abbots and monks, 3 abbesses and nuns, 4 men, 5 married women, 6 widows, and 7 children, also perhaps including the poor of Rome. 80 people collapsed during the procession as a result of being infected by plague. This is devastating and brilliant at the same time. Gregory organises these massive processions. He brings the entire city together to pray for relief. And while they're praying, 80 people die from the plague, right there in the procession, while asking for God's help. But Gregory doesn't stop. The Pope never once stopped preaching to the people, nor did the people pause in their prayers. He keeps going. He keeps leading. He keeps trying, even though he knows it's not working. According to legend, as the procession reaches Hadrian's mausoleum, the Archangel Michael appears with a sword and sheathes it, a sign that God's wrath has turned back and the plague is ending. The plague does eventually end. Whether because of Gregory's prayers or just the natural course of disease, Rome slowly recovers. And Gregory spends the next 14 years rebuilding, reforming, writing, organising. He becomes one of the greatest popes in history, not despite the plague, but because of it. He learned how to lead when there was nothing left to lead. Part 4. The forgotten pope who ruled during recurring waves. After Gregory, the plague comes back. And back again. And back again. Frequent subsequent waves of the plague continued to strike throughout the 6th, 7th and 8th centuries, with the disease becoming more localised and less virulent. For 200 years the plague returns in waves, sometimes in Constantinople, sometimes in Rome, sometimes across the Mediterranean. It's always there, always killing, always present. And popes have to rule through all of it. Most of these popes are forgotten. History doesn't remember them. We don't have detailed accounts of how they handled the plague. We just know they ruled while it was happening. But one of them sticks out. Pope Lando. When Pope Lando died in 914, the last year of his papal reign, it is likely he was stricken by a plague that swept across Europe since the 6th century and waxed and waned for several centuries longer. Lando's papacy lasts less than 6 months. He's elected in 913. He dies in 914. And probably, the plague takes him. We don't know much about Lando. We know he was from a wealthy family. We know he was Archbishop Cardinal of Sabina. We know he became Pope for 6 months. and we know he probably died from plague. That's all. That's his legacy. A 6-month papacy during plague, then forgotten. Part 5. The Pope who made the Black Death worse. Now jump forward 430 years. It's 1348. The Black Death. This is the second Great Plague pandemic. This pandemic swept through Asia and the Middle East, and into Europe between 1347 and 1350, and is believed to have killed between 1/3 and 2/3 of Europe's population. The Pope during this catastrophe is Clement VI. Clement VI is nothing like Gregory the Great. Gregory was a reluctant reformer. Gregory gave away his family wealth. Gregory led processions himself. Clement VI is a prince. He commissioned the new Tower of the Guard Robe, the audience, the new Papal chapel, and the grand staircase that led to it, and purchased the sovereignty of Avignon from Queen Joan I of Naples in 1348 for the sum of 80,000 crowns. While people are dying, Clement is building. While cities are burning bodies, Clement is expanding his palace. But here's where Clement makes a catastrophic mistake. The reigning pope at the time of the Black Death, Clement VI, attributed the plague to God's wrath upon human wickedness and called upon all able-bodied Europeans to make the pilgrimage to Rome in the Jubilee year of 1350 for the remission of sins and as a means to end to the plague. He calls for mass pilgrimage. During a plague, he tells millions of people, walk across Europe, travel through infected areas, come to Rome, pray, and God will end the plague. Thousands of pilgrims per day streamed into Rome to visit the basilicas of St. Peter and St. Paul by day, sleeping in flea-infested dormitories by night. Florentine historian Matteo Villani writes that during Lent and up to Easter, the pilgrims to Rome numbered 1.2 million. At the festivals of Ascension and Pentecost, they numbered 800,000. These pilgrims ensured that the plague spread to every corner of Europe. Clement VI, from his safe palace in Avignon, 450 miles away from Rome, calls for a pilgrimage that literally spreads the plague across Europe. He's trying to end the plague by calling millions of people together in close quarters. During a disease spread by contact, the death toll from this pilgrimage is incalculable. Historians believe it accelerated the plague spread and cost hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of additional lives. But Clement doesn't care. Or maybe he doesn't understand. Or maybe he thinks if enough people pray, God will stop the disease. The plague continues. During the Black Death, 1348, 1/4 of Clement's staff died at Avignon. But Clement himself survives. Because he's surrounded by physicians and burning torches and all the wealth the church has accumulated, while millions die, Clement watches from his palace. What popes could not do. Looking at these 5 popes across 800 years, Vigilius, Pelagius, Gregory, Lando, Clement, we see a consistent truth: the Pope cannot stop plague. Vigilius ruled during the deadliest pandemic in history and got kidnapped for his trouble. Pelagius died from it. Gregory did everything right. He prayed, he led processions, he reorganized relief efforts, and plague still killed thousands while he watched. Lando ruled for 6 months and probably died from it. Clement called for mass pilgrimage and accelerated the plague spread. 800 years, 5 popes, 3 major plague waves, millions dead. What did the church learn? That power is fragile, that authority has limits, that sometimes the most you can do is lead people through darkness while accepting you can't make it stop. Gregory the Great understood this. He accepted that he couldn't end the plague, so instead he built something that lasted: a reformed church, new institutions, spiritual authority based on service rather than power. The plagues teach us that even the Pope is mortal, even the Pope is vulnerable. Even the Pope, for all his authority, for all his wealth, for all his connection to God, cannot command death to stop. If you found this exploration of institutional powerlessness during catastrophe fascinating, hit subscribe. We've got more videos about popes who faced impossible situations, popes who rose to the moment, and popes who failed catastrophically. History judges popes not by what they couldn't do, but by what they chose to do when they realized they couldn't do anything. Thanks for watching.